So, right now there are two different games on the screen. On the top is a game called Defender. On the bottom is a game called Stargate. Maybe I got that backwards because, as you may or may not have noticed, these games have a few things in common. Like, I don't know, everything! These are both games in which you fly around a scrolling screen shooting space aliens. They're both made by Williams Electronics. The goal of each is to shoot these aliens before they take your people, although you can accidentally shoot your people here. And catch them before they fall to the ground and save them. In both games, if all 10 of your people die, the planet explodes. And in both games, you get a bonus between waves as you get to the next level. Also, both games are extremely, extremely hard. You see, in these games, whenever you press to turn around, you have to press a separate button. You have a joystick, but it only moves you up and down. You need to push a separate button to move forward, and you need to push a separate button to move around. I played both of these games for an hour each. And honestly, half of the time, I can't tell the difference between them. Like, a year from now, you show me a screenshot of one, I'm not gonna know which game it is. They have one other thing in common, though. They both made it into the book. Both of these games. As you can see, we have on our cases a filler entry. Actually, no! This is pretty much a fucking identical entry. Honestly, you might be able to call Stargate marginally better than Defender as it's the sequel, but you know how we're all just complaining about how sports games come out like the next year with just marginally teeny tiny better graphics? That's Stargate for you. And it was a problem all the way back in the 1980s, apparently. One of the biggest problems with the book is the filler entries. Like, this, if you might not have been able to tell, is post-commentary. I'm not actually talking while I'm playing one of the games, because these games are really, really difficult. I played for a long time, and I only got to level 3 on each of them. My goal when it comes to arcade games is to get a high enough score to get an extra life, and I've accomplished that in both of them. That would be 10,000 points, once again, in each of them. Like, the differences are minute at best. Stargate down there adds an extra button where you can briefly turn invincible and invisible that I never ever press, because it's quite useless. Both of the games also have a hyperspace button that teleports you somewhere randomly on the screen, which I don't use either because hyperspace buttons are stupid and a quick way to get killed in these old school shooters. Yeah, my high score in each of them is about 15,000, but the world record of Defender at least is 33 million, which is fucking insane. My hand was cramping after an hour. These games are intense, and I had to play it twice. But yeah. Like, a few times in the book, we're going to get near identical entries, which I'm going to have to go through. For example, there's Pacman and Miss Pacman, Animal Crossing and Animal Crossing Wild World, Gauntlet and Gauntlet 2. And especially shameful is Trauma Center Second Opinion and Trauma Center Under the Knife. If you don't know, Trauma Center Second Opinion is the Wii remake of the same game. And this is a problem constantly throughout the book. Down to near the damn beginning. Like both Galaga, which is a 1979 game, and Galaxian. Actually, I got that backwards because the games are too similar. Like, filler is one of the biggest, most annoying problems that I have with the entire book. It is the thing that probably drives me up the wall the most about it. And it's not always obvious like this, because if you're just looking at the list, you're not going to notice this one, because Defender and Stargate, they don't sound like they have nothing in common. You'd have to actually research the games, which I had done. And Defender is an extremely important game. It has 5 buttons, and it introduced the idea that that even the casual gamers can accept a more complex control scheme. Like, every single fighting game ever probably owes something to Defender. And I will admit, they're both fun. But, look, I just don't know what to say here. And as you might have guessed, there's not going to be 1001 episodes, because I am going to have to showcase a lot of these simultaneously, so the episodes don't get too repetitive. Like, if the game's enough of a duplicate, we're tackling it in the same episode like this. But the reason that the filler especially bugs me is because of all of the shit that they missed. Like, for example, they don't have a single Spyro the Dragon game or a Crash Bandicoot game. But yet, they need both of these. They need both Gauntlet games, Gauntlet 1 and 2. They need 2 Animal Crossing games. They need Lumines and Lumines Live. They need the DS Legend of Zelda games. They need Super Mario Lost Levels. Instead of, I don't know, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Klonoa, Endless Ocean, LSD Dream Emulator. Games that most people have at least heard of. Although I guess LSD Dream Emulator didn't really get a reputation until after the book's publication. At least the first draft. But there's definitely a lot of stuff you have to fault them for, like no Amnesia: The Dark Descent. That's lazy. For a while, it was considered one of the best horror games of the 2010s. I wrote a whole list here. Not a single Kirby game. How do you do that? How do you make a book of Let's Plays, or must-play games, not come up with a single Kirby game, or a single Mega Man game, and yet still have to feel that you need to rely on filler? How do you know that little? I mean, I guess Kirby's Epic Yarn was out, and maybe that just turned them off the entire series. But it's just little things like this. It's just these 2 problems that go hand in hand. Like, Facade, I'm not angry at its inclusion, even though I'm more angry at the game than its inclusion, because for all it's worth, it is unique, and it is an interesting idea that many people would like to see accomplished. What exactly is must-play when you've played one of these games? Why must you play the other one? Like I said, from all I'm concerned, I played Defender for an hour, and then I played Defender for an hour. You want to know the differences between the two? In Defender, the plane is purple, and in Stargate, the plane is orange. That's not strictly true, but god damn did I have to look forever to figure out what the differences are. In Stargate, there are these portals that will teleport you across the map, which is kind of pointless considering that you can teleport whenever you want. I already mentioned the invisibility superpower that I never use in Stargate because it turns you invisible as well and you can't see where you are. Stargate offers you an option to put in 2 coins so you can have 7 lives instead of 3, which I use only once by accident. The enemies in Stargate are smaller, which makes them harder to hit, which kind of makes it difficult, although I didn't really notice anything. There is a wider variety of enemies in Stargate, except they're all just act the same. There are volcanoes in the background of Stargate, which kind of makes it worse, because frequently I think I'm going to get hit by a bullet, or that the volcanoes can hurt me, because every other little moving dot can hurt you in the games, but the volcanoes don't. They're just a distraction. And finally, in certain parts of the background in Stargate, certain parts of the planet are a different color, which is like the only minor improvement. Everything else is functionally identical. So how would I describe Stargate? It's like Defender, except it's Defender. In both games, if all 10 of your people die, the planet blows up. And in both games, if an alien takes one of your people to the top, they become a super fast mutant. If you stay still too long, frisbee alien things will try and track you down. And my god, like, I'm playing shit right now, but I do get impressed with some of my plays here in both of the games, because, like, I suppose I was using MAME, and I suppose that I could have made it so that if I turned left or right on the control pad, it would make me go in that direction, but we have a word for that. It's called cheating. I played as close to the original layout as possible. And I think it's probably more fun that way. You will die a lot in this game. Like, I've played a lot of arcade games, and so far this is the hardest. Like, I don't think it gets much harder than this when it comes to arcades, unless it actually just is incredibly cheap. Like, this game is at least fair. I will say that. And yes, I'm going to say this game because, as far as I'm concerned, I played the same game twice. The only question is, which one makes it into the book? Which is an answer that like I said, I played these games for an hour each, and I don't know. I don't know. I mean, looking at what you're looking at now, which one do you think belongs in the book? Which one do you think is better? Or which one do you think is worse? I mean, Stargate might have quote-unquote nicer graphics, but it's 30 years later. Almost 40 years later. You don't notice the difference, because better graphics just means a couple of pixels are a different color. This is what Madden and FIFA is going to look like in 30 years, by the way. I mean, normally I can understand them sort of picking two similar games from the same franchise. For example, The Sims. The first one is one of the best-selling PC games of all time. It's super iconic, but it's not the best. So which one do you go with? Do you go with 1 or 2? And 3, while it's not the best, it is the most unique and interesting of the series. So I understand them for going with all 3 of The Sims. But here, why? Like, why? No, I'm genuinely curious. Why? Well, I guess we can consult the book and see their case for Stargate. Like, I know why they picked Defender. Defender is incredibly important. Also, what year was, which year were each of them released? Defender was released in 1981. The book says 1980, but most other sources I consulted say 1981. Stargate. Video game. Released in 1981. According to Wikipedia, these games were both released in the exact same year. Defender was in February, Stargate was in October. And yeah, that might not be enough time to develop a game, except all 3 Crash Bandicoot games were developed in a similar time scale. Like, you can make a more unique game in 6 months. Even back then. Like, some people say that Stargate is harder, but I didn't notice it. And even then, that's not a defense for, or it's not an argument that helps me in determining which one you should play. Because Defender is incredibly hard already. Like, maybe making it harder makes it better for what you want it to do, or maybe it becomes more alienating. Even though, once again, I didn't notice any significant differences in difficulty. I got about the same amount of points, same high score in each of them. Not exactly the same, but still. Oh yeah, speaking of Crash Bandicoots, including both of these was more important than including any Crash Bandicoot game. One of the defining mascots of the PlayStation 1. It was more important than including any Spyro games. It was more important than including Yar's Revenge, a game that people say to this day is one of the best games of all time. One of the most popular games on the Atari 2600 that came out at a similar time. And once again, more important than Pitfall, including both of these games. Pitfall was another one of the defining Atari 2600 games, or its sequel, Pitfall 2. And that's just at the era. If we want to talk about games of all time, including both of these games was more important than including Terranigma, which is known as the European Chrono Trigger. I know I keep saying that, but that's probably one of the most strangest absences in the entire book, considering it was written in England. Including both of these games was more important than putting in any wizardry game. It was more important than putting in Xenoblade Chronicles. It was more important than putting in DuckTales. It was more important than putting in To the Moon. And I could keep going on and on and on. Wasteland, Super Meat Boy, River City Rampage, Blaster Master, Borderlands 2, Catherine, Civilization 5, Fire Emblem Awakening, Gauntlet Dark Legacy, Batman Arkham City, which is a very, very strange one considering Arkham Asylum is in the book. Like, I mean, what more is there to say about this? Oh yeah, I gotta figure out which one we go with. You know, I really don't have much respect for a sequel that is so goddamn similar to its predecessor. Like, Stargate nowadays is known as Defender 2. There's nothing 2 about it. It's Defender .2. Like, back in the day, sure, you might have been able to tell a difference. Maybe. But like I said, I played each of these for an hour. Like, almost back to back, and a year from now, the only way I'm going to be able to tell the difference is the color of the jet. That is it. They both play functionally identical. The difference is that each do not create any new methods of playing. The backgrounds and Stargate may seem like it makes it easier to navigate, but you're not really paying attention to that. You're paying attention to what's in the sky, all the shit that's flying around. Oh yeah, and both of the games have smart bombs that you can detonate when you're in a tight situation. And you can shoot your people, too. Look, on this one, flipping a coin, I say Defender. Like, when it comes to all these games, Defender is the historically significant, creative one. Stargate is just Defender again. And I really do enjoy playing either of these games. But, like, they're both fun. Like, they were some of the most challenging arcade games worth playing. I played each of these an hour for a reason. I didn't have to do that. I played longer than I should have. My goal was just to get an extra life, which I just did in Stargate down there. And sometimes I just fly around doing that. But yeah. So, Stargate gets to be in a new category. It's not just a bad selection, it's a redundant selection. I want to see how many of those are in the book, because it just makes the games they neglected so much worse. Oh yeah, no single Mario Party game. Although you have to have every single Mario Kart ever, except Double Dash, the one that people say is the best. You need to have every single Guitar Hero, except 3, which people say is the best. I'm really tempted to take a look at, like, a list or something of games I missed, like No Klonoa. Games that I haven't even played, but I hear so much good things about. I believe Defender was one of the first vertical scrolling shooters, too. At the very least, it helped inspire them. Although I'm really grateful that the reverse button didn't catch on, because it might not look as challenging as it is, but if you're playing with the original control scheme, needing to move your hand from the thrust to the reverse button and the shoot button, it can give you carpal tunnel fairly easily. It plays more like a racing game than a space shooter, where you have to press a specific button for the thrust. And you need to gauge the distance that your plane or vehicle is moving. And it's not like you can be slow and methodical in this game. If you're too slow and methodical, they'll basically kill all of your people, and you'll be dealing with these really fast, really annoying mutants. And of course, the game will spawn more shit if you're slow. So you just gotta keep moving. So you've been watching this for about 25 minutes now. Once again, maybe you can enlighten me if you've seen a difference that I haven't. Remember, I played both of these, they play exactly identically. Stargate gives you one power that is more trouble than it's worth, so they play, as far as I'm concerned, identically. And this is what I'm going, like, I do respect some of the challenges of creating this book. Like, there's going to be a lot of times when there's going to be very identical sequels, and I'm not going to be entirely sure of which one I'm going to go with. Like, this one is probably easy. The right answer is probably Defender. It's not always going to be so easy, though. Like, making your own book, try figuring out which Pokemon game you should put into the book. Because there really is no reason to put in more than one. The games play way too similarly. People don't have to play Pokemon twice. So, which generation do you go with? Do you go with the first generation, Red and Blue? You probably should, because it's the most influential and important. But you shouldn't go with Red and Blue, because you could play Red and Blue through generations 2 or 3. Gold and Silver is the favorite of many, but people say that Black and White has the best story. Ruby and Sapphire introduced double battles, which was very, very important for the series establishing. Or it was a very important mechanic that is still important to this day. It turned Pokemon into a competitive series. Pokemon X and Y finally fixed the fucking HM moves. So which one do you go with? It's what I shall dub the Defender problem, considering what we have here. I mean, I suppose you could cheat and make it Pokemon series or Defender/Defender 2. But I don't know, that seems cheap. But yeah, I have for a while now been trying to make my own sort of list like this. Like a much better list, but this is one of the issues that I run into. There are some series that are just so goddamn... that have entries that are so similar. And they're not always identical. Like, Pokemon games, they're not identical, but you pretty much get the same experience no matter which one you play. The differences are fairly minor. But it's a problem in a lot of series. Like, I'm going to have a hell of a time with sports games, fighting games, and racing games because of this issue. Like, which is the best version of Street Fighter 2? How the hell am I supposed to know that? How the hell is anyone supposed to know that? It's largely based on personal preference, really. Like, at least with Super Smash Bros., people generally agree which was the defining entry. It's not always that simple. And there are definitely more complexities to this kind of thing. Like, for example, would you put A Link Between Worlds into this book? Like, A Link to the Past is probably a guarantee. Like, it would be insane not to include A Link to the Past. No matter what you think about it, it's one of the most popular Zelda games, one of the most popular games of all time. But A Link Between Worlds, is it too similar? Do you get too much of the same experience? I mean, you're going through the same world. It's almost like a remake with just a little bit of a twist. And the problem's more complicated when there's a bunch of other Zeldas that probably deserve to be there too. Like, would you include A Link Between Worlds when you had to deal with, or when, like, 9 other Zeldas were already in the book? Like, the Zelda series is what I'm most familiar with. Going through, guaranteed yeses are Ocarina of Time, A Link to the Past, Wind Waker, Breath of the Wild, Majora's Mask. Breath of the Wild isn't in the book, but if this book was made today, then obviously Breath of the Wild would be a yes. But that leaves every single other Zelda game. Like, the original. The original is one of the best games on the NES, but compared to all the other Zelda games, it's aged really, really poorly. But that's probably a discussion for when we get to that. The talking point is on A Link Between Worlds. Like, when I've tried to make my own list, that's something I've never been able to figure out. Even though I have played it through. I have played it through back to back with the original. I have no idea why I typed in ZZC as my score. But yeah, this is one of the reasons that making a 1001 video games book can be incredibly complicated. Like, video games, more so than movies, are prone to enhanced remakes, sequels that are slightly better. Like, movies doesn't really have this, and when it does have this, they're the Star Wars Special Editions. But when video games goes back to brass, we get things like this. Like, slightly altered versions of the games are something we've been accepting for years and years. But yes, I do definitely think that one of these games, at least, is a must-play. Does it really matter which one you play? Not really, but I don't know. Like, I do feel like I need to establish some kind of rule for when we get to this. Like, I mean, the obvious answer is the better one, but there is no better one. And I don't want to just mash them together. That feels awkward. Especially because with both of these, the title is now a lie. It says 1001. Never mind must-play games. There's not 1001 games in here. These two games are the same. I played the same game, twice. It's really pretty, though. When you blow up the fucking Earth. Like, I'm wondering, were these entries made by the same person? Probably not. Stargate. No, they weren't suggested by the same person, at least. Because this book had a bunch of different contributors, which is necessary. No one person knows that much about video gaming history. Like, no one person can know the huge, vast array of contexts of every time period, of every genre. Everyone's gonna have their own specializations. I honestly probably blame the editor more, or whoever was in charge of this project. You know, the person who couldn't alphabetize the table of contents. No, really, even in the 2013 version, the table of contents still is not alphabetized. They moved some things around, but did you know that Earth Defense Force 2017 goes alphabetically between echochrome, which is EC, and eats, hunger, it's emotional, which is EE. So according to them, the alphabet is CAE. Super Mario Bros., the original, is still sandwiched between 3 and 2, which is the only order of these 3 games that makes no sense. My hand is going to be sore for quite a few days after playing both of these games at the same time. Like, Defender is a game you should only play in short bursts unless you're, like, really hard. Unless you're really hardcore. Like, it wears you down. In ways that other shooters don't because of the button layout. There was also a Defender 3, which I don't think really matters. I don't think it's much of an improvement. Because Williams has been incredibly good at hiding it. Almost like they're ashamed of it or something. There was an Atari port of the original Defender, but it's not exactly the same experience. You had to fly all the way up to teleport, and you had to fly all the way down to use your bomb. Which doesn't really work. Because those are items that need to be used in the moment. I probably, like, walked to talk to someone in the Stargate one. Like, when I'm recording footage without talking, I am definitely able to just chat on Discord or whatever. Go to the bathroom, do shit like that. Oh yeah, I never saw what Stargate's defense was. Oh, Garf is in this book. That should be a fun one. Stargate was designed as a sequel to the hugely popular Defender, which within 6 months of launch was one of the biggest coin-op earners in arcade history. Yeah, in MAME you can press a button to insert a quarter. Considering how many times I replayed this, I probably spent the equivalent of like 40 bucks on just one of these damn things. And that's in an hour. Although working with the Defender format, Stargate introduced 15 different types of alien. Some cruelly designed to unbalance techniques learned at length to master the original game. Oh, so you can only tell the difference if you become an absolute master at Defender. That's good to know. Stargate was featured in an episode of the US sitcom News Radio. Well, Pack Rat was also featured in a US sitcom. Why isn't that in the book? So, the defense of Stargate is... It's Defender, but harder. Okay. I mean, I guess Stargate really would only be harder if you learn how to deal with all of the patterns and such in Defender. But as the first-time player, if you just walk into Stargate, it's not going to affect you. At least from what I could tell. So, to get the most out of Stargate, you would have to play through Defender. Defender is the answer here. That's what I'm going with. Defender is the must-play in this scenario. And even then, I only feel like barely confident about that. But yes, the Defender problem. Problem 1's making your own list like this, because it's fairly obvious that I do want to make my own list. Like, I want to make, quote-unquote, a real one. Something that actually takes this seriously and isn't just trying to be a cash-in on another more popular book. Because I truly do love the medium of games. Like, I do want to know as much as I can about it. Play as much as I can. Learn as much as I can. And I'm in kind of a paradox, you know? I want a really, really good, really, really well-rounded list. But at the same time, I don't want to be the one to have to make it, because then making the list kind of makes the list useless to me. Like, if you've already played all of the games that you must play, but yes, in this series running terminology, we've got our first one. The Defender problem. I suppose next time we should talk about the Pacman problem. Because, as you might imagine, with many of these, I'm going to be playing the exact same game like this. Split screen. And in one of them, it's going to be Pacman on the left, Miss Pacman on the right, or vice versa. Because, once again, those games are so similar that there's really no other way to do it. Although, that one's a little bit more complicated than Defender. I mean, to give you a little bit of the showcase, Defender, I believe, is the iconic one at least. So, you can't really say that the uniconic one is better. When it comes to Pacman, Miss Pacman is better in pretty much every way, and anybody who's played the games can agree that Miss Pacman is the better game than Pacman. The problem with that is that Pacman is one of the most iconic video games ever made. Pacman himself is the icon for video games in most cases. The Pacman problem is figuring out which one of those is better. Or, not which one is better, it's obvious that Miss Pacman is. Which one is the must-play? The better one, or the more iconic one? How far in are we? Oh. At this point, I stopped playing Defender and just switched to Stargate. The Stargate playthrough went on longer. About 15 minutes longer. I don't think that really means that Stargate is better. Like, I wasn't keeping time during either of these. I was just playing for however long the opportunity lasted. But now I guess you get to see what one of these games looks like full screen, in case that was really important to you. We still had 15 minutes to go, sure. I must say, I do love the colors of these games. Like, there's something about old arcade games that actually use colors. Like, they're weird, random palettes. Like, recently I tried Robotron for the first time, Robotron 2084, and just the colors in that game are mesmerizing in a way I can't really explain. Although it's probably going to be a while before I pick up that game, because it's... I don't know. I have more well-known, influential games to get through first. And you know, the sound effects here, they're just classic. But once again, they're the same as Defender. This game kind of has a little bit of a theme, I guess. When you start up a new game, it makes a growling sound, but the quote-unquote song or theme is pretty damn awful, so it's not, once again, it's not an improvement. Every kind of thing that Stargate makes is a lateral move. Every quote-unquote improvement. It's not a step forward, it's not a step back, it's just lateral. And I understand that there might be some hardcore players who could probably tell the difference, but once again, it's probably like choosing which is the best version of Street Fighter 2. It's personal preference. And I don't have a personal preference to either of these. They're just too similar. I mean, the only things that would sway my opinion are things that don't have to do with the games themselves. The fact that Stargate came out after and is kind of goes against it, and that Defender is more important. Those are the things that have helped me make my decision. Nothing about the games themselves. I mean, if there's anything at all that can make me say that Stargate is worse, it would be the volcanoes in the background. Because when it comes to an arcade shooter like this, there needs to be an unstated rule. Like, either something can 100% kill you, or 100% not kill you. And the volcanoes in the background kind of blur the line too much. The original Defender does not have those volcanoes, which is just an effect that gets in the way in some of the most minuscule amounts of things. Like, I could only determine that, like... Also, in Stargate, there are these... The enemies keep going up above the screen and end up on the bottom, something that seems very unfair. But it's not too much it's not too much you can't handle. Like, I mean, if you're playing Defender, you can handle pretty much anything that the game is throwing at you. There is never a dull minute. Never a time when things aren't frantic. And yeah, go into the portal, it just teleports you to the other portal. That's what Stargate is named for. You know, nowadays, it's called Defender 2. If they called it Defender 2 in the book, it would be a lot more obvious that this is just a filler entry. there will definitely be a lot more time to talk about filler. Next, because I think I want to at least establish the complexity of the Pacman problem, we're going to be playing Pacman next. Although there are other things that I want to talk about in the Pacman playthrough. Well, then again, I'm probably going to have at least an hour to do it, so... Because Pacman, and to an extent Miss Pacman, they've gotten a little bit of a reputation in the modern era that I really want to discuss. Which should be fun. But learning about the story of old arcade games is extremely fun and interesting to me. Like Defender. Defender is really important. Like, this huge environment. And yes, I know this is Stargate, but Stargate is like Defender, but Defender. These huge environments and this changing landscape was new. This game was so complex for the time. And even now, it still holds a lot of that complexity. You know, I mean, it doesn't... I mean, games like Heavy... Steel Battalion put it to shame. Steel Battalion Heavy Armor. But... also, yes, that's what blowing up the planet looks like in high def. It's just all so fascinating. But yeah, there are so many games back then that have just a story to tell. And we'll get to them next time.